Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, a place where you can come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker and welcome to episode 68, Real Empathy and Why It's Magic. All right, so welcome to October, and this month we're going to be taking a deeper dive into what empathy is all about. What it means, what it doesn't mean, how it's different from sympathy, how to do it, and what some of the obstacles to feeling and expressing it are. Especially with everything that's going on in the world today, I think empathy is something that's in the news. It's something that we're seeing out there, something that has been brought to the forefront around having empathy and understanding for people who are different from us, who believe differently, people who are struggling from the pandemic, people who are struggling emotionally, mental health-wise, all those ways. So I think it is an evergreen, important topic, right? One that we probably should always be talking about. And I think empathy is really important and so misunderstood. I mean, I do a lot of talking with clients around how is it different from sympathy, all of their questions and resistance to doing it. And again, for most of us, we're feeling the understanding and compassion in our heart. We just have a hard time getting it past our lips to the other person. And like we've talked about before, that's really vulnerable, right? That's why we've been avoiding it, folks. But if we want to have good relationships, be they personal relationships, work relationships, community relationships, and global relationships, it needs to first focus on understanding. So empathy is what? It is when you can really imagine walking in someone else's shoes for a moment, living out their experiences like they were your own. And one of the best things you can do is figure out, when have I been somewhere similar? What was that like for me? How difficult, how overwhelming, how wonderful. And so our own frame of reference, of course, has to come into play, but that's how we relate and connect, especially via our humanity. And I read something earlier this week. It says, you know you have empathy when you feel it in your heart a little. You know, it's that connection. It's when you're watching a great movie or a very moving news story, and it feels so authentic and genuine. You tear up, or you feel overwhelming joy or fear or anger, all the feelings. Now, what's interesting is that what we know today is that as humans, we're wired to experience empathy. So the understanding is that we have these what are called mirror neurons in our brains. And what they do is they reflect back actions that we see in others. And it causes us to mimic that action in our own brains. So in other words, if you see someone in pain or someone really happy, we actually experience that on the inside of us to some extent. And these are the main physiological basis of empathy. I've heard it said that it's kind of like a Wi-Fi that connects us to the feelings of the people around us. Isn't that cool? And so, of course, the argument is, why are some people really naturally empathetic and other people really struggle with it? I think there are lots of clinical reasons for that we'll get into this month. But what's important to remember is that even if you struggle with it, it can be a learned behavior. Just like kids need to have empathy shown to them, they internalize it and then they start showing to self and others. So don't worry about it. No matter where you are on the continuum of empathy, like from I do it well and I do it often to I hardly ever do it at all, and anywhere in between, it's all good. You can change it. You can get it into a better place. All right, so empathy is really validation of the other, validation of what is going on for the other person right now, what is going on for the other person in their recent past, maybe what might be coming up for them in the near future, like a medical diagnosis comes to my mind, a looming job layoff. And so it's either, what has happened thus far for them, what they're sitting in today, and or what's coming at them in the near future. Okay, so we can have empathy for past, current, and present circumstances. And I think it's really important, as I'll talk a lot about today, but stepping back and looking at the big picture for the other person is really, really important. Basically, you're validating their joy, right? Their fear, their wonder, their confusion maybe deep despair, maybe their sadness, maybe their internal conflict. As grown-ups, we're usually struggling with conflicting feelings often, or ones that we're not even sure fit together, or ones that fight each other. Like you could be really excited about something coming up, also have some sadness about something that might be changing because of that. So really just validating where someone is. A brief example is, wow, that must be really hard knowing that your mom is really sick. You must be so excited about closing on your new home. Or I can imagine how angry you are that your dad didn't get the care he was supposed to. Or that you felt like you were let go for no good reason. Or you're really afraid what's coming up financially for you. You're feeling really sad because your best friend just moved away. We're just mirroring back and we're validating, all right? So that's what empathy is. Empathy is not sympathy. Sympathy is, when you look at it very carefully, is really a judgment. I feel sorry for them. I feel bad for them. And that's really, sympathy is about us. It's great to have compassion and sympathy for others, but it's not so much understanding. Case in point, you could really be assuming how someone feels today after a loss, but without them sharing with you what it's really like for them, we're doing a hell of a lot of assuming. So that's sympathy. But we may not understand how they really feel. Maybe they have complicated grief going on. Maybe they have a lot of unresolved stuff with a person who just passed, right? So it's not always so simple. So having sympathy is not the same as having empathy. Sympathy is about us. Empathy is about them. Is kind of how I look at it. And so empathy is not, and we'll get into that in a minute, it's not agreeing or condoning. It's just stepping back, detaching, and understanding. Why is it so hard to just do empathy naturally? Well, I think there are many different obstacles, and a few of them I'm going to talk about today. And these are ones that when I went through empathy training years ago, we talked about. And these are ones I bump into all the time with clients, right? When we're exploring this concept. First of all, it feels awkward. Now think about it. This is not the way we normally talk to someone, at least in American culture. Gosh, look at a soap opera if you can tolerate it for 5 minutes. And look how passive aggressive it is. And look how people talk at one another. Like, are they really seeking to understand? And depending on what kind of family you grew up in and people who surround you today, being open and vulnerable and connecting may not be the way you go, right? May not be normalized for you. So it feels really awkward and stilted. And it's a big risk. We are assuming, this is when you actually do assume, you make an affirmative statement. Wow, that's got to be really difficult for you. Or wow, you must be so excited. Because here's the thing. We're so afraid of not doing it perfectly. And therefore, the fear is feeling rejected or unloved or imperfect. Do you see how that plays out there? And what's crazy is then we make it about us once again. So First thing you want to know is don't worry. And this is what's really cool, is that people will correct you automatically. They're like, no, I'm not frustrated. I'm pissed, Mary. And this is why I'm pissed. And then they will peel another layer of the onion and reveal more. Because remember, this is all we want people to do. We want them to know we're trying to understand, that we're here, paying attention, we're listening, and we get it, or we're trying to get it. And it's not about us getting it right, damn it. It's about them feeling heard. So if we miss it and it makes them say, no, it's not this, it's that, that's totally fine. That way they can express what it's really about, because that's what you want, because that's what we all need to do. See, we need to be on both sides of this coin to feel heard, loved, connected, to actually connect to another and be there for another person as well. So feeling awkward and getting it wrong are the two biggest obstacles. The other big ones are people say to me, I don't agree with them, Mary, and I don't condone how they're acting or how they're playing this out or how they see the story. You don't have to agree or condone. See, when people grow up with blurred boundaries in a family, the assumption is that if I normalize or say, wow, that must be really hard for you, then I'm agreeing with you or I'm condoning. And that's not true. There are two very separate things. Just because I may understand how you might be struggling with something doesn't mean I agree with it, doesn't mean I don't think you got yourself in that place, right? I mean, I could have all these judgments and they could be on point or they could be clouded by my own lens of how I see the world. They could be anything, but they're separate. Separate them out. You are not condoning. You're just stating where they are. That's all you're doing. Showing understanding and agreeing are two very different animals. Pull them apart in your own mind. Because remember, you're just mirroring back where they are. Hopefully, you're not passing a judgment. You're not putting your own opinions on how they got there, whether they should feel that way, how they created this for themselves. It's really that they simply do feel this way, right? Do you see the difference? You are essentially expressing acceptance, and acceptance doesn't mean agreement. Acceptance means that's how they feel, and that's where it is. That's the reality. And I can choose to accept it or not. And finally, it's really hard to stop and focus, stop and turn towards, stop and be emotionally available. If we were honest, we're so busy focusing on me, right? That myopic you hear me talk about, especially when things are stressful for you, things aren't going great, you got a lot of mental plates up in the air. It's difficult. You have a lot going on, probably a lot of unresolved issues in your head and in your heart. So it's hard. It's hard to create bandwidth. Conversely, do you ever notice when you're having a great morning or a great weekend or a great day because nothing's blowing up, maybe some things just got taken care of, and you notice how much kinder you are to other people and can show more genuine interest? It's like you're actually looking outside of yourself to connect with others. And we're much kinder. We give people more grace. We don't get so wrapped around the axle when they cut us off on the highway, that kind of thing. So it's really having some bandwidth and making some room for others. And then being distracted, right? Too busy, too hyper-focused. You know who you are out there. Not paying attention to what's going on around us. Again, creating that myopic. It's all about me and what I got going on. Which we want you to do self-care. We want you to stay on your own side of the street and focus on you. And there are moments when, okay, there's someone in front of me who's really upset. I need to put down my phone, down whatever is going on, and take a moment and turn towards. Remember those mirror neurons? Well, they work best when we notice what's going on. So we have to stop and take notice. Stop and pay attention. Put down what we're doing. Multitasking is a lie, guys. Especially with our relationships, it's not good. You know how it feels when someone puts down whatever they're doing and turn towards you and they're open and they're really listening. They're making time for you. Do you know how good that feels? Well, that's what I'm talking about. Becoming more aware, more mindful of being present. Don't be hard on yourself if you can't on a given day. Try it again the next day. So what are we noticing? We're noticing what they're saying, of course, like what they're really saying. Notice what they're not saying. Look for deeper meanings. Like if your child says, I can't believe that teacher's so mean, Mommy. What's underneath of that? Fear the teacher is too hard on them, doesn't understand them, that they cannot perform well for this teacher, that they don't feel cared for. There could be a lot of underlying things. So what you would say is, so you're really concerned about your teacher's mood. And your child says, yeah, they snapped at me today. I got in trouble. So you're really upset that you just disappointed your teacher. See how it's really never about the other person they're talking about. It always boomerangs back to them, as everything boomerangs back to us, right? You go a level deeper because that's what it's really about. So it's having that third ear. Notice their body language, their facial expressions, maybe the tone of what they're saying. What's interesting, if you get really good at this, you can look at incongruence, like someone who's smiling and saying something really upsetting or laughing when they should really be angry about what they're talking about. That incongruence you want to pay attention to as well. That's someone who really struggles to connect with their feelings. So you want to fire up those mirror neurons. You want to pay attention to all the details that you can. All right. I think finally, one of the biggest obstacles is lack of emotional maturity. And I know that sounds harsh, guys, but that's where it is. There's a whole continuum of emotional maturity. And what do I mean by that? We can be quick to judgment. We can lack compassion, lack depth of feeling for others because you lack empathy for yourself. Oftentimes people are very cognitive and very task-based and being successful and keep it moving and don't sit still and sit in feelings that they're so disconnected from their feelings and sometimes their own conscience that it's really hard for them to connect with another's feelings or imagine how the other person might feel. So those are some of the obstacles to empathy. You can resonate with some of those. You can think of some of your own. Remember, it's mindfulness and looking at distorted perceptions, like I have to agree with them, and turning them on their head, right? Anyone can learn empathy if you have a conscience. One of the things that you hear me talk about all the time that I personally think go hand in hand with empathy is loving detachment. Now, it's not so emotionally detached you're disconnected. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about detachment. In other words, that's about them, this is about me. And just because they doesn't mean I. Those are their feelings, their thoughts, their choices, their behaviors, their struggles, their problems, their unwillingness to see reality. The list goes on. Separate from that is how I might feel about their disconnect from reality, for an example. How I might feel about where they are and how they see things. If you're a parent, you know what I'm talking about. Maybe you're worried that your child doesn't see the consequences of not studying or mouthing off to a teacher. So we want to control that outcome as parents. We want to get them to see, quote unquote, that, yeah, this is not going to bode well for you for the future, honey. This is not good for you. But we have to detach and understand. The phrase that I use often is unless and until. Unless and until my child is able to see that, I can see it for them all I want to. Do you see the separation? What my child sees and what I see are two very different things. So detachment is, let me stop for a moment, put myself aside, and this is about you right now. But what's good about that is it forces you to let go. To just focus on them. This is not about you for the moment. This is not your problem, your struggle. It's not about your feelings or thoughts or needs. You put them aside, or when you get good at this, you can separate them out very quickly and say, okay, what's about them? Okay, now how do I feel about that? And separate that out. That's my caca. Detachment also helps you because it's not all caught up in your stuff. Like, I don't want them to be walking through this. I don't want to see my child hurting. I don't want to see my spouse hurting in a way that I can't fix. Do you see how we're blurring boundaries there? It's a mess. You want to pull them apart so that you can actually have some empathy, because I don't think that we can really feel and express true empathy for the other person, which is all for them, not us, until we can learn to detach and put our stuff to the side for a moment. Does that make sense? So something to really explore in your heart and your head this month as we walk through all this material. So empathy, in order to show compassion, I have to think about, when have I been hurt? When have I screwed up royally? When have I been confused? When have I been so excited, nervous, scared, in deep grief, right? When have I been excited, happy, just content maybe? What about when I've been furious? When I've just been overwhelmed, like can't even metabolize how awful this is? Or maybe just annoyed, or maybe bored. Just recognizing times when you may have felt a similar feeling. Now, guys, a caveat here. If someone is walking through something that you know there is no way in hell that you have ever walked near something that bad, you want to be honest, and you want to say, you don't want to pretend like, oh, I know how you feel. No, because you don't, because they just lost a child, and that's your worst nightmare. So we do want to pay attention to the gravity of that. And I think most of us organically get that, right? We get it. We're like, I can't imagine what that must be like for you, is what we say. Another thing is you want to continue to step back and get perspective, get some distance, so that you can see the entire painting, the whole story, the whole picture. And I've been guilty. We've all been guilty, because a lot of times we only see a snapshot, right? And then we're like casting judgment on that glimpse. But just like in your own life, 9 times out of 10, there's a lot more going on here. There's a lot more context and a lot of things that we don't see, because we can pass judgment and say, I can't believe they're struggling. If they would just do this, that, and the third, they'd be fine. Yeah, but if you zoom out, you see, guess what? There might be a huge risk that person has to take, big losses coming, huge fears that are valid that might be holding them back. If they tug on one string and that spider web of string, it's going to pull on something else. You know, everything is interconnected, and we often forget that. I swear we think things happen in a vacuum, and they don't. Emotional maturity means saying, guess what? It's probably a hell of a lot more complicated than I realize. You know, maybe there are other things making it difficult that they have never revealed. Maybe they have competing values going on, which is awful. Gut-wrenching choices we may know nothing about until they explain it to us. So we just want to make sure that we safely assume, I bet you there's some really good reason that's going on for them. For example, I have to sit with clients all the time around this, where their partner or their child or their sibling or their colleague, they just can't understand why this other person cannot pull the trigger on something. And I explain to them, because step back for a moment, what if they open that can? Then what? A classic example is if your partner's oh so dysfunctional family is making you nuts and they keep defending them, then they don't want to look at their stuff. You got to step back and remember, once they open that can, that's going to change everything for them. Like if they really look at how messed up their family is, they may not want to go hang out with them so much anymore. So here comes a huge loss in relationship, an impending loss that they're not ready to deal with. There could be trauma back there that you have no idea. So in other words, really gaining some perspective around what this might really, really mean for them. another big thing is you can't fix it. Let me repeat that. You can't fix their problems. You cannot fix it for them. You cannot make it unhappen. You can't make them just feel better and pretend everything's okay and ignore what's really going on. And guess what? It's not about you. I know that sounds harsh, but that's what we're doing, right? Rescuing is all about, I'm feeling uncomfortable because you're hurting. Rescuing is about us, not them. It is not the most loving and kind thing we can do. It's actually the most controlling and selfish. Rescuing helps no one, unless it's a true situation where someone needs to be rescued from a fire or drowning or some other accident, okay? Something they did not bring on themselves. It's their job to fix their own problems. We're just there to understand and listen. If they want our opinions, if they solicit them, okay, fine. If we have suggestions, okay, fine. But empathy first, everything else second, remember? The other thing I talk to clients about all the time, and we're going to talk about this month, is I think empathy is an inside-out job. I think it's really difficult to express genuine empathy for someone if you have yet to do it for yourself. If no one has shown you any, it's going to be really, really hard. Conversely, what's really neat, you've heard me say this before, once you do some healing within yourself of any unresolved grief or difficult things that no one provided empathy for you around, you doing that for yourself, you organically want to start giving it to others. Okay, we'll get into more of that later. And finally, empathy has a lot to do with your integrity. Like, what kind of person do you want to see yourself as? And we all get to choose that, which I think is really cool. But if you're someone who really wants to be known for your kindness, your compassion, and remember, you can have great boundaries and have those two qualities. Your unselfishness in terms of you think of self, you care for self, but you don't only think of yourself, that you do care about others, that you do want real, connected, vulnerable, genuine relationships. Because guess what? If you want that, empathy is so important. Empathy is also really important for healthy separateness, for people to feel emotionally safe in your presence. If you can't detach and show empathy, they're not going to feel safe. In fact, they're probably not going to want to share a lot of stuff with you. Okay, so remember last week when we talked about how when you don't sit with your feelings, you trust yourself less? And so when we were talking about anxiety last month, how it's going to go up, practicing empathy grounds us, I think. It gets you out of your own head. It creates a healthy separateness between where you end and others begin. And when you can force yourself to say, wow, sounds like you're having a bad day, it helps you not take it on. Those folks out there, those of you who tell me, Mary, I absorb everyone's feelings. Empathy is almost prescribed for you. Working on detaching and showing empathy is actually 1,000 times better for you than it is for the receiver, because it helps you separate and say, just very respectfully, that is about them. That is not mine, and I got to take my hands off of it and stop making it about me. All right, so how do we go about working on some of this? And this month, we're going to take a deeper dive. But for this week, I just want you to look at, if you struggle to express empathy, I just encourage you just to sit and create some awareness. Don't take any action yet, just create awareness. So first of all, just notice. When you have a moment, and whatever moment you can grab, don't be perfectionistic about this, please. Just whenever you can think about it, just watch people, the real people around you, maybe people in the community, maybe people on the screen. It doesn't matter. I just want you to observe. Just do an observation. And notice what you see, and then more importantly, what you feel. Look at their context. Look at everything that might be going on for them that you know of, right? What might they be feeling? And why would that make sense? Have you ever been in a similar situation? I mean, you're just guessing here, right? It's okay. And then notice how you feel doing this. Do you feel uncomfortable? Do you feel anxious? Do you feel fear? Compassion? Maybe all the above? That's okay. Just want you to note how you feel. How are you doing with this? Can you sit with it? Sitting with stuff without fixing it and without running away from it? Wow. That in and of itself could be one thing you work on only for the next couple months. Just notice how you feel with that, and that'll tell you. And finally, just throughout your week, just practice kindness and compassion whenever you can. Some moments you're just not going to feel like it. You're not going to have it within you to give, and that's okay. Just experiment. Just turn towards others. Maybe take a moment to look at your child and smile. Maybe to give someone a hug. Maybe just to send a text to your sister and say, hey, how are you? That's it. So today we talked about the concept of empathy, and we're going to get into this all month. We talked about how important it is to our relationships, our emotional trust, feeling connected, feeling understood, showing understanding. So join us all month as we take a deeper dive into empathy. Now, realistically, we could take like 3 months and not finish. But I think it's an important topic, and my hope is that working on this month, it'll give you a springboard for the next quarter of something really cool to work on. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. May you stay healthy, grounded, and hold on to hope. Find one good thing a day in yourself this week. And I challenge you to find one good thing in others as well. Be sure to check the show notes at ownitpowercast.com if you haven't already, to sign up for the newsletter that comes out every Tuesday. You get the blog, you get access to the podcast episode, and if there are any bonus downloads, those are there as well. All right. So, pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.